Hey guys, this is Greg Jones or Zerosum79 for DragTheBar.com, and today I'm going to be bringing you the first part in a two-part video series about memorizing the Nash equilibrium. So can you memorize Nash? Nash seems like a very complicated system, and in this video series I'm going to be bringing you a very simple method for memorizing the Nash equilibrium for heads-up play. So the goals for the video are really a few. One is to really answer why you might want to memorize Nash. And it's a good question. Why memorize Nash? Well, if you can have a chart up on your screen and be playing online, you can easily go and read the Nash charts and play pretty optimally. But the problem is that when you're playing heads up in a sit and go, you're going to be facing constant decisions at that table because you're going to be involved in every single hand that has to play. So a lot of times when you're multi-tabling a lot of different tables, you're going to find that you've got some tables where you fold and then you don't have to make another decision for a while. But these heads up tables, as soon as you fold, you got to make another decision almost immediately. So memorizing Nash is going to make those decisions easy so that you don't have to spend a lot of focus on those tables. Another thing that memorizing Nash is going to do is to help you keep from making a lot of mistakes heads up. Because once you've memorized Nash, you don't really need to check the chart at all, and you're going to be playing really optimally. So if you can minimize the focus necessary on the heads-up tables and be playing a more optimum game, not only is it going to help your ROI on that table, it's going to help your ROI on the other tables because you're going to be able to take more of your focus and put it back on the games that you haven't gotten past the bubble yet. So pivot points can really help. I use a method of pivot points, a specific method of pivot points to play the Nash equilibrium. And there's a condensed enough set of pivot points that you can memorize them easily. Now there are some other systems out there which you can use to play Nash. One is called Sage. That's probably the most popular version that's out there right now. But this system is really better than Sage because Sage really only goes up to about 8 big blinds deep. And it turns out that we can actually get a full 10 big blind Nash system memorized easily using my pivot points. And it's good because a lot of times in sit and goes you're going to be facing 10 big blind situations, so Sage isn't going to help you that much. Now, I think that memorizing Nash is going to basically give you an edge online. And actually also memorizing Nash will be really helpful because you're going to be able to use this in live situations if you're playing like a satellite or you're playing some MTT live. So this is the Nash chart that you can find on hold'emresources.net or pretty much anywhere else. Notice this Nash chart is for 20 big blinds deep, and anything that's above 20 big blinds has a 20 plus, meaning you can shove it for at least 20 big blinds. And it's a very complicated and daunting looking chart because there's lots and lots of values and the numbers don't seem to have any real distinct pattern. And yet there actually are patterns in this. So first let's talk about how you use the Nash heads-up chart, just for a little refresher. Let's say you're going to shove a hand like King 4 offsuit, and you want to know whether you can push it or not when you're first to act heads up. Well, the way you would read this chart is you can see that the bottom left-hand corner is color-coded peach. That's all the offsuit hands. And the upper right-hand corner is color-coded green. That's all the suited hands. So for King 4 offsuit, you want to find the number where King and 4 intersect in the peach-colored area. And that's going to be following the King column down to where it intersects with the row of 4s. You're going to see that you can shove King 4 offsuit for 13.1 big blinds. And, you know, if you needed to look at a suited hand, let's say you were now looking at King 4 suited, you would follow the King row over to where it intersects with 4 again. You can see now if it's suited, you can actually shove it for 20 big blinds. So this is a very complicated chart, and you could just keep this up on your computer. That's sort of how I did it for a long time. But I got to the point, I actually got into a live situation where I was fairly certain I was going to be playing heads up for a decent sized prize. I was on a cruise, and I was playing a poker tournament on a cruise, and I won a shootout, which basically got me to the final table of a second five-handed shootout, and first place was to win this cruise. Now, a couple of the players were short stacked, and I had a pretty deep stack, so I felt like I was likely to get, heads up, and I was not capable of doing Sage, and I was looking for a method to sort of simplify the Nash heads up. So if I got heads up, I would go ahead and play pretty good heads up push fold game. And it turns out that I was able to get heads up, and even though I played Nash, it didn't work out for me. That's sort of the way it breaks. But I came up with this system, which I think is very valuable. Now let's take a look at the Nash chart in a different way. I call this a heat chart. And what you can see is I've actually taken the Nash chart and I've color coded it so that any hand that you can push for 10 big blinds is color coded green, and any hand that you cannot push for 5 big blinds is color coded white. And then there are a few red hands in there. And those hands are the ones that you can push for somewhere in between 5 and 10 blinds. So this heat chart actually looks much less complicated. You can see there's huge areas of green and huge areas of white, and not too many red hands. This is the zero-sum method. Now we can take pivot points and describe this. So let's look at some observations. Like I said, mostly green, 10 big blind plus hands, or white, less than 5 big blind hands, and not too many red hands. So by breaking this chart into big chunks of green and white, we can actually come up with a few points which are going to help us describe the chart almost entirely and almost perfectly. Let's take a look at how we do this. So first let's talk about hands that we can definitely shove for at least 10 big blinds. The first thing is you can notice the top 3 rows are all 10 big blind hands. So you can see that any suited ace, king, or queen we can shove for 10 big blinds easily. And also we can see that the leftmost 2 columns we can shove for 10 big blinds easily. And then another easy pattern is that we can see that you can shove any pocket pair for 10 big blinds easily. So those are going to become our first 3 sets of pivot points. Suited aces, kings, and queens, offsuit aces and kings, and all pocket pairs. Next, we need to describe some of the garbagier looking hands that you can also shove for 10 big blinds. And with just 2 more pivot points, we can do that pretty easily. So the first thing is look down here at 5-4 suited. What you can see is that that's really the bottom suited connector that you can shove for 10 big blinds. And you can see that almost every card above it is a 10 big blind hand. And you can see that if you move up and to the left, almost every card up and to the left of this point is also a 10 big blind hand. So if we go ahead and box this region out, we can say that 5-4 suited plus plus is a 10 big blind hand. And that's kind of cool because the plus plus is a little notation I came up with. It means that if either of these 2 cards is greater than or equal to 5-4, then you can shove it. So for example, 6-4 you can shove if it's suited. 6-5 you can shove if it's suited. So if either or both of these cards are greater than 5-4, then you can shove it. And you can see that there's only really one mistake here, the 6.9. That's tolerable. That's not a big deal. And you can see that we also miss one hand, Jack 3 suited, which is a 10 big blind shove hand. We'll talk about how to deal with that later. And the next point we can see, which is also very similar, is that you can look at 8-7 offsuit. And if you see that that hand is shovable for 10 big blinds, and pretty much every hand in that triangle is shovable for 10 big blinds, then we can also notate 8-7 plus plus as a hand that's a pivot point for shoving 10 big blinds. So actually in total, if you use these 2 pivot points, there's 5 total misses, which is pretty minor because say you shove 10-7 offsuit, and you shove it for 10 blinds, but you really only should shove it for 9. You're not making a huge equity error there. And again, Jack 7 offsuit, which actually seems like it should be a better hand, you can only shove for 8.5. Shoving that for 10 also isn't a big error. Alright. Next thing to do is to look at the hands that we cannot shove for 5 big blinds. And this is going to be even better. Because what you're going to see is now, if we take this 9-3 minus minus point, which is 9-3 suited minus minus, you can see that everything where you subtract either one or more of the cards from this hand, you're going to get a garbage hand. And likewise, if you look at 10-5 offsuit, that also determines the garbage hands for these 5 blind or less shoving points. So these 2 points together are pretty easy to memorize. They're going to tell you which hands are not shovable for even 5 big blinds. And there's really no misses in this. Alright. Now we've described all the premium hands and all the garbage hands, and all we need to do now is try to find a way that we can describe some of those in-between hands. And the way I like to do it is I like to think of what the endpoints are. So for example, Jack 2 suited you can shove for 8.5 big blinds, and 10-2 suited you can shove for 6.5 big blinds. So we know that by the time we get to a suited 4, it's going to be a 10 blind hand, and if we know the endpoint for the suited 2, then we know that it's at least 8.5. You can do a little estimate. So like let's say for example, this hand 10-3 suited, which is 7.7 here. If we just sort of guess that we know that 10-2 suited is 6.5, and we know 10-4 suited is going to be 10, we can kind of guess halfway in between 6.5 and 10 is going to be a relatively good range to shove. So maybe you would guess 8 or 8.2. You wouldn't be super far off from this actual Nash value. And again, we can determine the endpoints for the offsuit Queen 2, which is 7, and then Jack 2, which is about 4.5 here. And we can do the same kind of maneuvering by remembering that any offsuit 7 is going to be about 10 big blinds. So we can sort of guess midpoints between our hand and that offsuit 7, and we'll get a good value for those. Another way that you can memorize these offsuit ones is that typically if you add about half a blind for every hand value above 2, it's going to go up quite like that. So let's say Queen 2 off is 7, and then if you know you got Queen 3 or Queen 4, just add half a blind or a blind, and you're going to be pretty close to accurate. Alright, so now we've got a complete system of Nash pivot points for shoving. Remember, we've got the premium suited aces, kings, and queens, offsuit aces and kings, and then pocket pairs. And then we've also got 5-4 suited plus plus and 8-7 offsuit plus plus. Then we've got garbage hands. You cannot shove for 5 blinds, which are 9-3 suited minus minus and 10-5 off minus minus. And then we've got these endpoints, which are going to help us to make a little bit more accurate decisions on those cards, those hands that are in the red range between 5 and 10 blinds. So it seems a little complicated. I want to show you a couple examples of how we're going to implement this, and you'll see that it actually becomes really easy, because a lot of times, for example, you're going to have a situation where like you've got 10 blinds, and you see that you've got a junk hand you can't shove for 5. It's easy to pitch. And for example, let's say you've got 5 blinds, and then you find yourself with a premium hand, which you know you can shove for at least 10, then you can go ahead and shove it all day long. Alright, so let's take a look at a hand. This is Zerosum79 sitting at the merge network with about 1,200 chips, playing heads up against some guy. And I've got a garbage hand. We know that because 2-9 is less than the 10-5 offsuit minus minus. So what in this case, both cards are lower than 10-5, meaning the 9 is lower than a 10 and the 2 is lower than a 5. So we know that's going to sit in the garbage range. And we know that this is only a shovable hand for 5 big blinds. When you go ahead and calculate, you see I've got 1,200 chips, and the big blind is 200, so I've got 6 big blinds. So this becomes an easy fold. Alright, in the next hand, we see that I've got a premium hand, because you remember suited aces, kings, and queens, and offsuit aces and kings can all easily be shoved for 10 big blinds. And in this situation, I'm playing against a guy who's got about 780 chips left, which is much less than 5 big blinds. And so you can see that this is a really easy shovable hand, because we know that 5 blinds deep we can easily shove a hand that we can shove for 10. So I go ahead and shove. And in the final hand, we're now playing an in the middle hand. You can see here that this is a little bit better than Queen 2 offsuit, which we know you can shove for 7 blinds. So we should be able to shove this hand for somewhere between 7 and 10 big blinds. And we can go ahead and guesstimate, say to ourselves, okay, well, Queen 4 offsuit is 2 hand cards better, 2 pips better on the kicker than Queen 2. So I would go ahead and add 1 full big blind or 1/2 blind per card and say, okay, I can shove this for about 8 big blinds. And it turns out that we're playing for 880 chips, which is actually 9 big blinds. So this hand would be a fold. All right. Now we've seen how you implement the system. Let's talk a little bit about memorizing the system. So the way that I tell my students to do this is I tell them to go one line at a time. I want them first to spend time memorizing the premium hands. Because once you even can get the premium hands out of the way, you've got about 60 or 70% of the chart done. Because you saw how big that section of green is in the chart. You can see that that's actually where you're going to get the most value from spending time memorizing things. So aces, kings, and queens all look like premium hands. And so even though queen two suited isn't so good, it'll help you to remember just aces, kings, and queens. Aces, kings offsuit, and twos, and I just spend a week, playing my normal games, but just try to recognize every time one of the hands in this first line pops up. Oh yeah, that's a premium hand. And then once I've got that line down, then I'll move on to the next line, and I'll do the other premiums, 5-4 suited and 8-7 off. And then line by line, you want to go through these. First doing the premiums, then the junk, and then you remember by the time you get to the sort of in the middle hands, you've really got about 90% of the chart memorized, maybe 95% of the chart memorized. So these small corrections, even if you never actually memorize those numbers, you're going to find that you can really play Nash really, really effectively. You could even, for the in the middle hands, I've told some students, okay, well, just think to yourself, okay, if it's not premium and if it's not garbage, just set your threshold at around 7.5 big blinds, which is halfway between 5 and 10, and you're going to be making about the right decision. So you can see that a lot of these hands, sit around 7.5 blinds, and you're not going to be making too huge of a mistake to just say, okay, well, if it's not a premium, if it's not a garbage, I'm just going to shove it for 7.5 blinds. But eventually, you'll get to the point where you want to go ahead and memorize these numbers. So, in conclusion, you can memorize Nash, and it's actually pretty easy. It takes very few pivot points, and one of the great things about spending some time memorizing these ranges is that actually once you've done this, memorizing the calling ranges for Nash is actually going to be even easier. In the next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run you through these ranges again a little bit, and then I'm going to show you the new calling ranges, and you're going to see that actually with a very, very small adjustment to what you've memorized from the pushing and shoving pushing ranges, that you can find the calling ranges pretty quickly. So for more cool stuff like this, I highly suggest checking out my new book, Crushing Online Sit and Goes. This is one of many topics that I discuss in there at length, and one of the topics that I've basically reserved for my private students, which I now want to bring you guys as a preview of my book. You're going to find that there's a lot of really interesting information in there, which helps fill out the ABCS and G series information. It's going to get much deeper. It talks about a lot of advanced concepts that are not in the ABCS and G series that are going to help you to move up through the stakes. So I hope you go ahead and pick that up. And with that said, this is Greg Jones or Zerosum79 saying good luck at the tables.